The alkali dust stung Levi Cross's eyes as he rode the perimeter of his land. It was a harsh, unforgiving stretch of New Mexico territory, all baked earth and skeletal mesquite. He preferred it that way. The land asked nothing of him, and he offered nothing in return, save for the ring of his hammer on the anvil. He was a farrier, a mender of iron, a man who understood the logic of horseshoes and hinges better than he understood people. People were complicated. People brought trouble. He saw her first as a bundle of rags snagged on a clump of greasewood. A mile from his cabin, he pulled his horse up, eyes narrowed. It was not a deer, and it was not a coyote. It was a person. He dismounted, rifle in hand, and approached slowly. The wind pulled at the bundle, revealing a human shape, face down in the dirt. A woman! He nudged her with the toe of his boot. A faint groan, like a dying animal. He knelt, turning her over. She was young, younger than he had first thought, maybe 20. Her face was hollowed by starvation, her lips cracked and bleeding. Her dress was torn, exposing skin blistered by the sun. Her feet were bare, the soles cut to ribbons by the sharp rock. She was dying. Beside her lay a small, worn leather satchel. He picked it up. It was heavy with coin. He opened it and found a handful of silver dollars and a small Bible. The cover of the book was dark with a stain that was unmistakably blood. Levi swore, low and soft. Blood and money. It was the worst kind of trouble. He looked at the vast, empty horizon. He could ride away. He could leave her to the buzzards. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. His whole life for the past 10 years had been about doing the smart, safe thing. He sighed, the sound lost in the wind. He slid his rifle back into its scabbard and lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. Her head lolled against his chest, and he tried to ignore the faint scent of fear and sweat. He laid her across his saddle and walked the horse back to the cabin, his mind already calculating the cost of this involvement. He brought her inside, the cabin dim and cool after the glare of the sun. It was a one-room affair, solid and clean, smelling of wood smoke and iron. He laid her not on his bed, but on the cot he kept by the cold hearth. He kept his distance. He was a man accustomed to suspicion. He had lived on the wrong side of it for too long. He fetched water from the barrel, dipped a cloth, and washed the grime from her face. Her eyes fluttered open, wide with a terror so deep it looked like madness. She tried to scramble away, crab-walking backward on the cot until she hit the wall, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. "Easy," Levi said. His voice was rough from disuse. "You're safe enough here." "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. "My homestead found you on the line." He offered her the dipper of water. She stared at it, then at him. He was a tall man, weathered and quiet. His hair was dark, his eyes guarded. He wore simple denim trousers and a faded shirt, but he wore his gun belt like it was part of his skin. She drank, spilling water down her chin, her hands shaking so badly he had to steady them. "Who's chasing you?" he asked. "Not what happened. Who?" Her eyes filled with that same terror. "I cannot go back. I will not." "Back where?" "To them. The preacher's men." She clutched the neck of her torn dress. They hurt me. They said I was correction." Levi looked at the blood-stained Bible he had placed on his table. A preacher. That was a dark twist. He had known men who killed for gold, for land, or for pride. But men who hurt women in the name of God were a different breed of poison. "You rest," he said, turning away. "No one's coming for you here. Not tonight." He slept by the door, his rifle beside him, and listened to her choke on nightmares all night long. The next days fell into a strange, silent rhythm. Levi rose before dawn, tended his horse, and fired up the forge. The clang of his hammer against the anvil was the only sound for miles, a steady, lonely heartbeat in the wilderness. He would leave food on the table, a hunk of bread, some dried jerky, or a bowl of beans, and go to his work. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She was like a feral creature, wary and broken. She spent the first day just trying to clean herself. She found his bar of lye soap by the wash basin and scrubbed at her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away more than just the dirt. When she moved, she winced, and he saw them. The bruises. They were dark constellations on her arms, a sickening yellow-purple bloom on her back when she reached for the water. There was a mark on her neck, half hidden by her matted hair, that looked too much like fingers. He felt something cold and familiar tighten in his gut. It was the old anger, the one he had tried to bury out here with the silence and the ironwork. She, in turn, watched him. She noticed his silence. He did not speak unless a question needed asking or answering. He moved with a heavy stillness, as if carrying a weight no one else could see. He ate his meals standing by the window, his gaze fixed on the horizon, always watching. She saw the way his hand sometimes drifted to his side, to a place beneath his shirt, as if touching an old ache. The landscape around them was a partner in their isolation. The cabin was tucked into a shallow canyon, but beyond it lay endless dry hills, cracked and thirsty. Rattlesnakes sunned themselves on the warm rocks. The wind never, ever stopped. It howled through the gaps in the window frames, a mournful, constant presence that scraped at the nerves. It was a reminder that there was no easy way out. To leave meant walking into that dry, howling emptiness. She was as much his prisoner as his guest. On the fourth day, she found her voice. He was cleaning his rifle by the fire, the metallic snick of the lever action sharp in the quiet room. "Your name," she said, her voice still rough. He didn't look up. "Levi Cross. I am May Harper." He nodded, acknowledging it, but offered nothing more. She took a shaky breath. "Mr. Cross, I want to ask you something." He continued his work, wiping down the barrel with an oiled rag. "Ask it." "I saw the targets you have set up, behind the barn. I want you to teach me how to shoot." His hand stopped. He set the rag down with slow, deliberate care and looked at her. His eyes were flat, devoid of any warmth. "No." "But No," he repeated. "The rifle is for killing. It's not something anyone should want to learn." "You know how?" It was an accusation. "I do," he said, his voice quiet and dangerous. "And I'm telling you, you don't want it." He turned back to his rifle. The conversation over. She waited until the next afternoon. He was splitting wood, the axe falling with a steady, brutal rhythm. She stood in the doorway of the cabin, her hands twisted together in the folds of her ruined dress. "Please," she said, loud enough to be heard over the splitting wood. He ignored her. The axe fell again. "Please," she cried, desperation sharpening her voice. She stepped out into the yard, flinching as the sun hit her. "You don't understand. They will come for me. That preacher, Ezra, he doesn't let things go. He says I belong to him. He'll send them." Levi stopped, the axe buried in the stump. He wiped the sweat from his brow with his forearm. "And what will you do? A girl with a rifle against a half-dozen men? You'll be dead before you clear the leather." "I don't care about being dead," she yelled, the words torn out of her. "I care about being helpless. I will not be helpless again. I would rather die than have them touch me again." He saw it then, the absolute, bone-deep resolve. Her eyes were dry, burning in their sockets. She was past tears, but her hands, balled into fists at her sides, were shaking so hard she could barely stand. It was the tremor of a body that had endured too much, a soul stretched thin. He stared at her for a long time. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't blink. He saw the bruises on her face, the desperation. He saw what she was willing to become, and he saw himself, years ago, making a similar choice. He turned his back on her. He pulled the axe from the wood and, without another word, resumed his work. The sharp thwack of the blade was the only answer she got. May crumpled to her knees in the dust, a silent, dry sob shaking her frame. That night, the dream came for Levi. It was always the same. The smell of cold rain and wet wool. The canyon in Colorado. The glint of a rifle barrel from the rocks above. A place where no rifle should have been. Betrayal. The sudden explosion of gunfire. The pain, sharp and hot, as the bullet tore through his side. He remembered the mud on his face, the taste of blood in his mouth, the faces of the men he had ridden with, their eyes wide and surprised in death. He woke with a gasp, his hand clutching the scarred flesh at his side. The cabin was black, the fire reduced to embers. He could hear the wind, and beneath it, the sound of May weeping in her sleep. He sat there in the dark, the nightmare clinging to him, the old pain in his side a dull throb. He understood her fear. He knew what it was to be ambushed, to be left for dead, to be utterly, terribly helpless. He had sworn that day in the mud that he would never be helpless again. It was the vow that had turned him into a gunslinger. It was the vow that had ruined his life. In the morning, the air was cold and still. He had the fire going when she woke. She sat up on the cot, her eyes puffy, her face braced for another day of silence. Levi was cleaning his pistols at the table. He didn't look at her. "I will teach you," he said. She froze, unsure if she had heard him right. He finally raised his head, his gaze heavy. "But there is one condition. No lying, not between us, not ever." I don't lie," she stammered. "Everyone lies," he said, his voice flat. "They lie to protect themselves, or to get what they want. We won't have that. If I ask you a question, you will tell me the truth. If you ask me one, I will do the same. If I find you've lied to me, the lessons stop, and you're on your own. Do you understand?" She swallowed, daunted by the intensity of his stare. "Yes." "Good," he said. "Finish your breakfast. The first lesson is now." He took her out into the flat, open space behind the barn. The sun was high, baking the earth. He set a small, empty can on a fence post about 50 yards away. He unslung his Winchester and held it out to her. "Stock first." "This is a Model 73, he said, his voice all business. "It's heavy, it kicks, and it is louder than you can imagine. It is not your friend, it is a tool. You treat it with respect, or it will hurt you." May reached for it, and her hands began to tremble again. The rifle was solid, oiled wood and cold steel. It felt impossibly heavy in her arms, a solid weight of death. She tried to lift it to her shoulder as she had seen him do, but she wobbled, the barrel dipping toward the ground. "Hold it steady," he commanded. "I'm trying," she whispered, her voice tight with frustration and fear. The memory of other men, other hands holding her down, flashed in her mind. Levi watched her struggle, his face impassive. He saw her knuckles turn white. He saw the panic rising in her eyes. She was afraid of the noise, afraid of the power, afraid of failing. He let out a slow breath. He walked up behind her, his shadow falling over her. She flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, he settled himself behind her, his body close but not touching, a wall of heat at her back. "Let the rifle rest," he said, his voice lower now, closer. He placed his large, calloused hand over hers on the forestock, steadying it. He put his other hand on her shoulder, guiding her. "Put the stock here, against the hollow of your shoulder. Tight. If it's loose, it'll break your collarbone." She pressed it back, her whole body rigid. She could feel the warmth of his chest against her shoulder blades. She could smell him, the faint scent of forge smoke, soap, and something uniquely male, like leather and dust. It was overwhelming. She had not been this close to a man, not by choice, in longer than she could remember. "Now sight down the barrel. Line up the post." She squinted, trying to focus. The can seemed to waver in the heat. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could feel it. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the explosion. "Open your eyes, May," he said, his voice patient for the first time. "You can't shoot what you can't see." I can't," she whispered. Tears of frustration welled. "I'm going to drop it." "You won't drop it. I've got you." His words were simple, but they struck her like a physical blow. "I've got you. No one had ever—" "Your hands are shaking," he observed, his voice a low rumble by her ear. "You're not breathing." She realized it was true. She was holding her breath, trapped in a loop of panic. "Forget the can," he said. "Forget the trigger. Just breathe. Breathe slow. In and out." He inhaled with her, a slow, steady expansion of his chest against her back. She followed his rhythm, in and out. The shaking in her hands began to ease, just slightly. The rifle still felt heavy, but his hands were supporting its weight, and hers. "That's it," he murmured. "Don't shoot. Not yet. Just breathe. Just feel the weight of it. Close your eyes." She obeyed. The bright, harsh world vanished. There was only the darkness, the impossible weight of the rifle, the solid man behind her, and the sound of the wind. She focused on his breathing, letting it anchor her. She leaned back, just a fraction, into his strength. It was the first time she had felt safe in months. The moment stretched. The wind died down. There was no sound but their breathing, in unison. Slowly, she turned her head, tilting her face up toward him. Perhaps she meant to ask a question. Perhaps she meant to thank him. She only knew she needed to see the face of the man who had told her to breathe instead of shoot. Her cheek brushed the rough cotton of his shirt. His head was bent toward hers, his gaze on her face. Their eyes met. They were too close. The world narrowed to the space of inches. He looked at her mouth, chapped and pale. She looked at his, firm and unsmiling. He didn't move. She was the one who rose up. Just that last inch. He met her halfway. The kiss was slow, hesitant, almost clumsy. It was not a kiss of passion, but of desperation. It was a bruising, painful thing. It was the press of two mouths, two people who had forgotten how to feel anything but pain and fear, trying to remember what it was to be alive. It tasted of dust and salt and a deep, shared loneliness. She felt a jolt, sharp and sudden, that had nothing to do with the rifle. He broke it first. He pulled back, his eyes dark and unreadable. He let go of her and the rifle, and she nearly stumbled under the sudden weight. He took the Winchester from her trembling hands, his face a mask of stone. "That's enough," he said, his voice thick. "Lesson's over." He turned and walked back to the cabin, leaving her standing alone in the sun, her lips tingling, her world tilted entirely off its axis. The kiss hung in the air between them like gunpowder smoke, thick and stinging. They did not speak of it. The next morning, Levi rose before dawn, his face set in harder lines than usual. He went to the forge, and the sound of his hammer on the anvil rang across the plains, sharp and relentless, an angry punctuation to the silence. When May emerged from the cabin, she found him already returned, cleaning his tack. He did not look at her. "If you're staying," he said, his voice flat, "you'll work. The horse needs mucking, the water barrel by the door is low, and my shirts need mending." It was not a request. It was a wall. May flinched, the memory of the kiss still tender on her lips. She did not know what she had expected. Anger, perhaps, or softness. But this cold dismissal felt like a different kind of rejection. She nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, Mr. Cross." "Levi," he said, still not looking up from the bridle in his hands. "My name is Levi." He added more structure to their days. It was a barricade they both desperately needed. Mornings were chores. Afternoons were shooting lessons. Evenings were for cleaning the weapons, or mending, or simply sitting in the suffocating quiet as the fire burned low. The shooting lessons changed. He no longer stood behind her. He stood 10 yards to her left, his arms crossed, his voice critical and distant. "You're anticipating the kick again. May, squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it. You're too tense. Breathe. You cannot hit what you're fighting." Again. She learned to load, clean, and break down the rifle until her hands were raw and stained with oil. She learned to hate the heavy, solid weight of it, and to respect it at the same time. In the evenings, the silence stretched, broken only by the howl of the wind. It was May who finally broke it. Several nights after the kiss, she sat patching the elbow of his denim work shirt, the needle awkward in her unpracticed fingers. "His name is Ezra Grigg," she said to the floor. Levi stopped stirring the pot of beans over the fire. He remained still, his back to her. He said he saved me." Her voice was small, a ghost in the room. "There was a fire, at a place, a brothel in St. Louis. I was trapped on the second floor. The smoke was everywhere, and then he was there, breaking down the door. He carried me out, his face black with soot, quoting scripture." She paused, her hands stilling in her lap. "I thought he was an angel. He told me I was a brand plucked from the burning, a soul God had sent him to reclaim. I believed him. I followed him. I joined his wagon train, his traveling ministry." Levi turned slowly. Her head was bent, her hair hiding her face. "He had corrections," she whispered. The word was poisoned. "At first it was just prayer, hours on my knees, begging forgiveness. Then, when I faltered, it was other things. He said my body was a vessel of sin, and it was his duty to cleanse it, to beat the wickedness out. The others, his men, they watched. They believed him. They said amen." She looked up, her eyes dry and burning. "He made me a scapegoat. When supplies ran low, it was because I had tempted God's wrath. When a man got sick, it was my unclean presence. The blood on the Bible I had?" Levi nodded, his gaze steady. "It wasn't mine. It was from a boy, a young man who tried to speak for me. Ezra corrected him, too, in the woods. When the boy didn't come back, Ezra told the camp he'd run off, seduced by my sinful ways." Levi stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. The cabin was utterly silent, the wind outside seeming to hold its breath. "He's just a man," Levi said, his voice low and hard. "He is a monster," she breathed. "Monsters are just men, May," he said, his gaze shifting to her. "Men who like their work." He stood, restless, and walked to the window, staring out into the blackness. "I worked for a man once, down in Texas. He owned half the county and wanted the other half. When he had disputes with his neighbors, he paid me to end them, with bullets." He said it flatly, like a fact. He was not confessing. He was merely stating his place in the world. He was telling her, no better than the men she feared. That knowledge settled between them, heavy and dark. It should have pushed her away. Instead, it drew an invisible, dangerous line, connecting them. They were both marked. But May's body was a trap. Years of being told her flesh was sinful, a source of corruption, had been etched into her nerves. The brief, desperate connection of the kiss had terrified her. Now, this new unspoken intimacy was worse. One morning, she was at the stove, pouring coffee. Levi moved past her to grab the tin of sugar. His arm brushed her back. She flinched so violently she dropped the pot. Scalding coffee splashed across the floorboards. She stumbled back, hitting the wall, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her hands were up, her eyes wide with a terror that was not for him, but for the memory of other men, other touches that began just as innocently. "Don't," she whispered, the words strangled. Levi froze. He looked at the spilled coffee, then at her, his face hardening. "I was just getting the sugar." His voice was cold, Clipped. He stepped back, deliberately giving her a wide berth. He looked at her as if she were a spooked horse, unpredictable and dangerous. The rejection in his eyes, or perhaps it was confusion, or anger, stung her more than the spilled coffee. He turned, grabbed his hat, and left the cabin without a word, slamming the door behind him. The tension in the small room thickened over the next few days until it was nearly unbreathable. They moved around each other, two charged wires, afraid to touch. The breaking point came during a lesson. It was late afternoon, the air hot and still. May was frustrated. She kept missing the can he had set on the post. The kick of the rifle was making her shoulder ache, and her nerves were frayed. "I'm pulling left, I know," she snapped, lowering the rifle and rubbing her shoulder. "You're flinching before you even pull the trigger." Levi's voice came from behind her, sharp with impatience. "You're afraid of it. After all this time, you're still afraid of it." "I am not," she retorted, turning. "You are." He stalked toward her, his patience gone. He hated seeing her fail, because her failure meant he would fail. It meant she would die. "Give it to me." He didn't take the rifle. Instead, he stepped behind her, crowding her, his anger a palpable heat. "Again, get in position." She stiffened, trapped between her frustration and his sudden proximity. "I know how to stand." "You stand, but you don't commit." He put his hand on her shoulder, his grip hard, forcing her to brace herself. "Now, raise the rifle." She did, her arms trembling with anger and something else. He was too close. His body was a solid wall against her back. "You're fighting it," he growled. He put his other hand over hers on the stock, forcing her aim. "Stop fighting! Squeeze! Don't pull!" His breath was warm behind her ear. "Breathe, May." The same words as the first day, the same position. But this was not gentle. This was raw, and his impatience scraped against her own. She smelled the soap and the faint metallic tang of the forge on his skin. She felt the hard muscle of his chest against her shoulders. She felt a spark. It was not fear, it was defiance. She was tired. Tired of being afraid of Ezra Grigg. Tired of being afraid of this man. Tired of being afraid of her own shadow. She turned her head, her cheek brushing his rough-bearded chin. He paused, expecting her to argue. She let go of the rifle. It fell to the dust with a heavy thud. Before he could react, she turned in his arms, grabbed the front of his shirt in both her fists, and pulled his face down to hers. She kissed him. It was not the hesitant, bruising kiss of before. This was a kiss of challenge, of anger, of desperate, claiming need. It was all teeth and fury. A drowning woman breaking the surface for air. His surprise lasted only a heartbeat. A low groan rumbled in his chest, and he responded. His arms clamped around her, one hand tangling in her hair, pulling her head back, the other seizing her waist, lifting her until her feet left the ground. He kissed her back with a hunger that matched hers, a hunger he had kept chained for weeks, for years. This time, they did not stop. He didn't let her go. He carried her, walking backward, out of the harsh sunlight and into the dim, dusty cool of the barn. He kicked the door shut with his heel. The barn was quiet. The only sounds were the nervous stamp of his horse in its stall and the high, lonely whistle of the wind rattling the tin roof. The air smelled of dry hay, old leather, and earth. He set her down, but only to press her back against a tall pile of hay bales. They stumbled, sinking into the loose straw. It was not gentle or slow. It was a collision. Clothes were fumbled with, torn, pushed aside. It was clumsy and urgent. Two starving people at a feast. He was rough, and she met his roughness, her fingers digging into his shoulders, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning apart. It was a desperate act, a way to feel something other than fear, a way to connect that required no words, no explanations, no past. Afterward, The silence that fell was profound. They lay in the hay, their bodies sticky with sweat and chaff. The dim light shafted through the cracks in the barn wall, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The wind sounded hollow. May felt the chill first, and then, like a physical blow, the shame. It crashed over her in a suffocating wave. The preacher's voice, whispering in her ear. His words of damnation, of sin, of her inherent ruined nature, harlot, sinner, unclean. She began to tremble, not a shiver from the cold, but a deep, racking tremor that shook her to her bones. She curled into a ball, turning away from him, hiding her face in her arms. "I'm ruined," she whispered, the words choked and broken. "He said I was, and he was right. I'm ruined all over again." Levi sat up, the hay scratching his bare skin. He pulled on his trousers, his movements stiff. He looked at her, this small, weeping woman curled in his hay, and a deep, profound guilt washed over his face. He saw her, not as the defiant woman who had kissed him, but as another victim. He felt like the men he used to hunt. He had taken the one thing she was trying to reclaim. He didn't know what to say. Words were useless. He had never been good with them. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment. Then he touched her shoulder. She flinched, but he didn't pull away. He slid closer and pulled her back against his bare chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, his chin resting on the top of her head. He just held her. He held her while she cried, his jaw set, his eyes staring into the darkness of the barn, his face a mask of guilt. A new normal settled, heavier than before. They did not speak of the barn, but they no longer slept in separate beds. One night, a cold snap hit, and he found her shivering on her cot. He had, without a word, picked her up and placed her in his own bed, and then laid down beside her. They slept back to back, not touching, but sharing the warmth. It became the routine. The shooting lessons became relentless. About a week later, the mail rider, Silas, appeared on the horizon. He was a wiry old-timer who chewed tobacco and brought news from the outside world once a month. "Howdy, Levi," Silas called, reining in his mule. "Got you a catalog from Montgomery Ward. Nothing else." Levi nodded, taking the thin book. May watched from the cabin doorway, wary of the stranger. "Queerest thing in town, though," Silas said, spitting a stream of brown juice that sizzled in the dust. "Got a new poster up. Some preacher man, fella by the name of Grigg, offering a bounty, 50 silver dollars, for a woman." Levi's hand stilled on the catalog. "A woman?" "Aye." Silas squinted, enjoying the gossip. "Name of May Harper. Poster says she's a thief. Run off with his missions funds, but that ain't the queer part. Poster says she's wanted for witchcraft." Silas cackled, a dry, rattling sound. "Witchcraft? Ain't seen one of them since Salem, I reckon. Still, $50 is $50. That'll bring the trackers out, the low-life ones. Anyway, hope they find the poor girl before the preacher does. He sounds like a hard one." Levi's face was granite. "Thanks for the mail, Silas." He waited until the mail rider was a speck in the distance. He saddled his horse without a word and rode the 10 miles to town, a cold knot in his stomach. He saw it, nailed to the sheriff's office wall, stark white against the weathered wood. Wanted for theft, deceit, and witchcraft, May Harper. It described her hair, her eyes. It warned that she was a siren, a tool of the devil, who used her wiles to prey on good men. Levi ripped it from the wall. The sheriff was inside, but Levi didn't care who saw. He folded the paper, mounted his horse, and rode back. He found May where he had left her, sweeping the cabin porch. He didn't speak. He walked past her to the outdoor fire pit, crumpled the poster in his fist, and dropped it onto the dying embers from his morning forge. He watched it curl, brown, and then catch, the black letters of her name turning to ash. He knew what this meant. $50 was enough to interest men who were desperate. Witchcraft was a license to kill. No questions asked. It meant they wouldn't just bring her back. They would feel righteous in putting a bullet in her. He waited until the paper was gone, scattered by the wind. "May!" he called, his voice rough. She came over, her hands tightening on the broom handle. She had seen the look on his face. "What is it?" "You have a choice to make," he said, his voice flat and final. "A choice?" "There's a poster in town. For you. $50. For theft and witchcraft. They'll be coming." Her face went pale, but she didn't crumble. He had trained her too well for that. She stood tall, her eyes fixed on his. "I have a good horse," he said. "All business. Fastest one I own. I can pack you enough food for a week. Point you south. You can be in Mexico in 3 days if you ride hard. I'll give you money. They won't find you." He was offering her an escape. He was offering to send her away, to get her out of his life, to keep her safe. It was the smart thing, the right thing. She looked at him. She looked at the cabin, this small box of wood that had been her prison and her sanctuary. She looked at the rifle, her rifle, leaning against the cabin wall where she had left it after her morning practice. She walked over and picked up the rifle. She checked the action, the movement fluid and familiar. She turned back to him, her eyes clear and cold. "I'm tired of running. Levi?" He stared at her, confused by her stillness. "This isn't Griggs' men. These will be trackers, killers, men like me." "I know," she said. She held his gaze, and for the first time, he saw no fear in her, only resolve. "You taught me to breathe. You taught me to stand, but you haven't taught me how to fight." She took a step closer, the rifle held firmly at her side. "So, if you teach me how to shoot," she said, her voice quiet but unbroken, "I'll stay." Levi looked at the woman before him. She was not the broken creature he had pulled from the dust. She was not the weeping woman he had held in the barn. She was something new, something forged, and she was not asking him. She was telling him. A slow, hard smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. It was a terrifying, beautiful sight. "All right," he said. "We'll stay." The decision to stay changed the air between them. The dry, crackling tension of the past weeks was replaced by something heavier, more focused. The silence was no longer about avoidance. It was about preparation. Levi stepped up the training. It was no longer about hitting a tin can on a post. It was about killing. "You won't have time to aim," he told her, his voice hard as packed earth. He set up 3 targets, burlap sacks stuffed with hay, roughly man-shaped at different distances. "You'll have time to point, breathe, and pull. That's all." He taught her marksman drills, forcing her to load, fire, eject, and load again until her fingers, already calloused, were bleeding at the cuticles. He made her run. "They won't stand still for you," he yelled, standing by the barn as she gasped for breath 50 yards away, her lungs burning. "Run to the trough, turn, and fire." She ran, the rifle heavy in her arms. She turned, raised the rifle, her arms shaking. She missed the sack entirely. "Again," he roared. She ran, she fired, she missed. "Again, until you hit it!" She ran until she thought her legs would collapse. She fired until her shoulder was a knot of purple bruises. Finally, late in the afternoon, the bullet thudded into the center of the burlap. She dropped to her knees, panting, the rifle falling into the dust beside her. He walked over, his shadow falling on her. She looked up, expecting criticism. He simply dropped a box of cartridges by her hand. "Reload," he said. "Now we learn to shoot from cover." He taught her survival tactics, things he had learned in the high, cold mountains of Colorado and the deserts of Texas. He showed her how to move in the sparse trees that lined the dry creek bed, how to use shadow and rock, how to walk without snapping a twig. He taught her how to listen, how to tell the difference between a coyote's step and a man's, how to hear the shift of a horse's weight miles away on the wind. He taught her how to fire under pressure. He would walk behind her, silent, as she practiced her drills. Without warning, he would fire his own pistol into the air, just yards from her ear. The first time he did it, she screamed and dropped the rifle, her hands flying to her ears, her body curling in on itself. It was the sound of Ezra, the sound of men's anger, the sound of a threat she could not stop. Levi stood over her, his pistol smoking. "Get up!" You frightened me," she whispered, her body trembling. "Good," he said, his voice void of sympathy. "You should be frightened. Fear keeps you alive. Panic gets you killed. When the bullets are real, the noise will be 100 times worse. Get up, again." She got up, her face pale. He did it again an hour later. She dropped the rifle, but she did not scream. He did it the next day. The pistol cracked, and she flinched, her shoulders hunching, but her hands stayed on the rifle. Her grip was white-knuckled, but she held on. He did it a week later. The gunshot echoed across the plains. May did not flinch. She did not stop. She ejected the spent shell and slotted a new one into the chamber, her eyes fixed on the target. She was toughening up. The softness he had seen when he first found her was burning away under the harsh sun, leaving something harder, leaner. Her hands were scarred. Her eyes, once wary and desperate, were now watchful. She still flinched at sudden loud noises, the slamming of the cabin door in the wind, a log shifting too quickly in the fire, but she got better at hiding it. She tucked the reaction away, deep inside, turning the fear into a tighter grip on whatever was in her hand. The nights changed, too. The cold snap that had hit the territory did not break. The wind found new ways to slice through the chinking in the log walls. One night, Levi woke to the sound of her teeth chattering from the cot. The fire was embers, the room near freezing. He rose without a word. He did not light the fire. He walked to her cot, pulled the thin blanket back, and lifted her. She was stiff with cold, her eyes wide in the dark. "Levi," she started, a question in her voice. He ignored it. He carried her the few steps to his bed, the larger, sturdier one he had built into the wall, and laid her down on the straw, ticking. He pulled the heavy wool blankets and the single buffalo hide over her, then climbed in himself, his back to her. "Warmth," he said into the darkness. A statement, not an explanation. They lay rigid, a foot of cold air between them, but the shared space, the heavy blankets, slowly leached the chill from their bones. They did not sleep. They listened to the wind howl. They began sleeping in the same bed regularly after that. The cot was folded and put away. It was a practical arrangement, born of necessity and the shared danger that hummed in the air around them. Most nights. It was not sexual. It was for warmth, for comfort. It was the unspoken solace of having another living, breathing body nearby in the vast, dangerous dark. Sometimes he would wake from his nightmare of the ambush, his hand clutching the scar at his side, and her proximity would ground him. Sometimes she would cry out, a small, choked sound, and he would reach back, his hand finding her shoulder, a silent, heavy pressure that said, "I am here." Then the storm came. It rolled in from the west, a bruised black wall of clouds that swallowed the sun whole. The air became electric, still. And then the sky broke open. Rain came down in sheets, a deluge that turned the dry yard into a river of mud. The wind screamed like a dying animal, and the thunder was deafening. It was not a rumble, it was a physical crack, an explosion that shook the very foundations of the cabin. May was on her feet, her hands over her ears, her back pressed to the wall. With every crash, her whole body jumped. This was not a test. This was not Levi's pistol. This was a war. "May," Levi said, his voice calm, rising above the din. He was sitting at the table, checking the action on her rifle. She shook her head, her eyes squeezed shut. I can't. It's so loud. Another crack, closer this time, simultaneous with a flash of white light that illuminated the room, freezing her in a mask of terror. She cried out. He was across the room in 2 strides. He took her by the shoulders, his grip firm, and turned her away from the window, forcing her to look at him. "It's just the sky," he said. "It cannot hurt you. Look at me." She opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face, and focused on his. "You are safe," he said, his voice a low anchor in the chaos. "I am here. You are not with him. You are here." He guided her to the bed, sat her down. The rain hammered the roof. He sat beside her, his presence a solid weight. She was still shaking. "I hate it," she whispered. It sounds like his voice when he was angry. It sounds like the world ending." "The world isn't ending," he said. "It's just a storm." He didn't know what else to do, so he put his arm around her, pulling her close. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, burying her face in his shirt, her hands gripping his arms. He held her. He sat there for an hour, for 2, his hand rubbing slow, comforting circles on her back as the storm raged. The thunder moved on, becoming a distant rumble. The rain softened to a steady drumming on the roof. The immediate terror passed, leaving an exhausted intimacy in its wake. She was still pressed against him, her breathing evening out. She was clinging to the sound of his voice. "Talk to me," she whispered, her face still hidden. "Please, just keep talking, so I don't hear the wind." He was not a man who knew how to talk. He searched for words, for anything to fill the quiet. "I was in a storm like this once," he said, his voice rough. "In the mountains. I was younger. I thought I was going to die. I hid under a rock ledge for 2 days, ate nothing but a wet biscuit." She was quiet, listening. He took a breath. He had never told this to anyone. "The first man I killed," he said, the words heavy and strange on his tongue. "It wasn't for money. It was by mistake." She grew very still in his arms. "I was 17, working a cattle drive. We got to Dodge. This older fella, a drifter, he accused me of cheating at cards. I wasn't, but he was drunk, and he was loud. He pushed me. I pushed him back. He fell wrong. He hit his head on the corner of the bar. Levi stared at the cabin wall, but he was seeing a saloon floor, a pool of blood. He was dead before he stopped rolling. He pulled a gun on me. I didn't have a choice. I drew faster. I didn't even think. It was just a reaction. And he was on the ground, and I felt nothing. It was easier than the first time. It was just work." He felt her pull away slightly. He looked down at her. She had lifted her head, her eyes searching his in the dim light. She was not horrified. She was not disgusted. She was listening. "Ezra told me all men were sinful," she whispered. "He told me you could see the rot in their hearts." "He might be right about that," Levi said, his voice bitter. She reached up, her hand hesitant, and touched the scar she could feel through his shirt, at his side. "The ambush." He nodded, surprised she remembered. "Colorado. I was the rot. I was the man who ended disputes. And I got ended myself. Or they tried. I woke up in the mud, with 4 dead men around me, my partners. And I knew I was done. I rode south. I didn't stop until I found this place. A place where I could just hit iron. Iron doesn't bleed." He had laid his truth on the table, as promised. He waited for her to recoil, to move to the other side of the bed, to look at him with the same fear she held for Ezra Grigg. She held his gaze for a long time. The only sound was the rain. She didn't forgive him. He didn't ask for it. She didn't leave. "Instead," she said, "we've both done what we had to." And she leaned in, and she kissed him. It was not the desperate kiss of the field or the furious kiss of the barn. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a choice. They made love again. It was quiet and careful, and filled with a trust that had been absent before. She kept her eyes closed the whole time, clinging to him, her hands fisted in his shirt, her body moving with his, but she was not listening for the thunder. She was listening for his voice, as he whispered her name, as he told her, "I am here," over and over, a promise against the dark. Weeks passed. The poster in town was a silent threat. They were running low on essentials: coffee, salt, flour, and most importantly, cartridges. Levi had enough for a fight, but not enough for continued training and a fight. "We have to go to town," he said one morning. "They'll recognize me," May said. It was a statement, not a protest. "Maybe," Levi said. "Maybe not." He looked at her, his gaze calculating. "We can't have May Harper going to town, but someone else can." He retrieved his shears from the forge. "Sit." She sat on the stump outside. She did not question him. She closed her eyes. She felt the cold steel against her neck and heard the sharp snip as the first lock of her long, dark hair fell to the dust. He worked quickly, his large hands surprisingly steady. He cut it short, like a boy's, leaving it shaggy and uneven around her ears. When he was done, he handed her his spare pair of denim trousers and a flannel shirt. "Put these on." She went inside. When she emerged, Levi felt something in his chest tighten. The woman was gone. The clothes hung loose on her thin frame, but the way she stood, the way her short hair exposed the strong line of her jaw and the watchfulness in her eyes, it unsettled him. The softness was gone, but he admitted, as he looked at her, she looked strong. "It'll do," he said, turning away to hide his expression. "Keep your head down. Don't speak to anyone. Let me do the talking. We get what we need and we get out." They rode into town under a gray, overcast sky. The town of Adobe Wells was little more than one muddy street, 2 saloons, a general store, and the sheriff's office. Levi tied the horses in front of the store. "Wait here," he said. "No," May said, swinging down. "I'm not waiting. I'm your shadow." He nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "All right, shadow." The store smelled of cured tobacco, pickles, and dry goods. The storekeep, a bald man named Peters, nodded at Levi. "Cross," he said. "Peters, need cartridges. 4440, 6 boxes, and 50 pounds of flour, 10 of salt, and all the coffee you have." Peters raised an eyebrow at the size of the order but began stacking the goods. "Heard you had a visitor out your way," he said casually, not looking at May. "Just hired help," Levi said, his voice flat. "Boy's quiet, but he works." May kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the floorboards. She felt the heat of the store's pot-bellied stove and the heavier heat of men's eyes. 3 men were lingering by the stove, nursing bottles. "That's a heap of cartridges for a farrier." One of the men slurred. He was heavy-set, with a greasy beard and a drunk's confidence. "I like to shoot," Levi said, his voice dropping a degree. The drunk, a man named Jeb, pushed himself off the wall and sauntered over. He looked at May, who was pretending to inspect a harness. "This your boy?" Jeb sneered, his breath sour with whiskey. "He's a mite scrawny. What's your name? Boy?" May didn't look up. Levi stepped slightly in front of her. "We're busy. Jeb," Levi said. Jeb's eyes narrowed. He looked at May's bowed head, at the small hands. He looked at her eyes as she risked a glance up, and he recognized her. The recognition flashed across his face, followed by greedy understanding. $50. "Well, I'll be," he breathed, a slow, rotten smile spreading across his face. "This ain't no boy. This is that witch." He lunged, his hand grabbing May's arm in a bruising grip. "I got her! I got the witch!" May reacted instantly. She didn't scream. She brought her knee up hard into his groin, just as Levi had taught her to do. Jeb howled, his grip loosening in surprise, but he didn't let go. Levi moved. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't want the sheriff. His fist, hard as the iron he hammered, connected with Jeb's jaw. The sound was a wet, sickening crack. Jeb's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, unconscious, in a heap on the floor. Levi, Peters, the storekeep, shouted, his hand dropping below the counter. "He was drunk," Levi said, throwing a heavy pouch of coins on the counter. "That's for the supplies. And the trouble." He grabbed May's arm. "Go, now!" They fled the store, ignoring the shouts behind them. They untied the horses in a frantic tangle of reins, threw themselves into the saddles, and spurred them out of town. The bags of supplies left behind on the porch, they galloped, hard, not looking back, the wind whistling past their ears, the sound of their failure thundering in their chests. They rode the 10 miles back to the homestead in less than an hour, their horses lathered and blowing. They burst into the yard, dismounted, and stood, panting, adrenaline vibrating through them. "We lost the supplies," May said, her voice shaking. "We lost more than that," Levi said, his eyes already on the horizon, on the road from town. "He'll wake up. He'll tell them. They know where you are." He grabbed his rifle from its scabbard. "They know." They spent the rest of the day in silence, barricading the cabin. They boarded the windows, leaving only small slits to shoot through. They reinforced the door. They moved all the water and ammunition inside. The waiting was the worst part. But no one came. The sun set, painting the sky in bloody streaks of red and orange. The night passed in suffocating silence. The next day, the sun rose, bright and clear. The air was calm. Levi stood at the small slit in the window, his gaze fixed on the eastern ridge. He had been there for hours, unmoving. May was loading the rifles, her hands steady. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but the panic was gone. Just after 9 o'clock, he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost casual, but it cut through the silence like a knife. "May." She looked up. "Get your rifle," he said. "We have company." She joined him at the window, far in the distance, tiny black specks against the brown hills. 3 riders were silhouetted against the bright morning sun. They were not hurrying. They were coming slow and steady and sure. The silence of the homestead was a tightly wound spring. Levi moved with a lethal economy, checking the newly boarded windows, placing his spare pistol and a box of cartridges on the small table by the bed. He had 2 rifles, the pistol and a shotgun. It was not a fortress, but it would have to do. May sat at the hearth, her back to him, her hands working mechanically. She was loading bullets, the small brass shells, the primers, the gray powder, the heavy lead. Her mind was focused, her movements practiced from weeks of drills, but her hands trembled. It was a fine, deep tremor that originated in her shoulders, a physical manifestation of the terror that had her by the throat. The men were coming. The man was coming. This was not a burlap sack. This was not practice. Levi watched her. He saw the tremor and said nothing. It was her fight to master. "They're taking their time," he said, his voice low. He stood at the narrow slit he had left in the window boards, scanning the ridge. "They want us to wait. They want us to listen to the wind and imagine what they're going to do. They think it'll make us sloppy." "Will it?" she asked, her voice small. She seated a bullet, her thumb pressing it firmly into the casing. "No," Levi said. They waited for another hour. The sun climbed, burning off the morning chill, heating the cabin like an oven. The air was thick with the smell of stale wood smoke, fear and gun oil. Then they were there, just as he had seen them. 3 riders, moving at a walk. They stopped 100 yards from the cabin, just outside of easy rifle range. 2 of the men were hard cases. Levi recognized the type. They wore dusty trail clothes, their pistols tied down low. They were men who worked for wages, men who would kill for $50. The 3rd man was different. He was dressed in a respectable black coat, his face clean-shaven, his posture rigid. He sat his horse like a judge, and in his hand he held not a rifle, but a thick, black Bible. May stopped loading. The cartridge fell from her trembling fingers and rolled across the floorboards. She had stopped breathing. "May," Levi said, his voice sharp. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the man in black. "Breathe. He's just a man." "That's him," she whispered. The sound was barely human, a wisp of terror. "That is Ezra Grigg." The preacher dismounted. He raised his arms, as if to embrace the homestead. His voice boomed across the yard, deep and resonant, a voice trained to carry over restless congregations. "Harlot, hear me. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life." He took a step forward, his boot heavy in the dust. The 2 gunmen fanned out, their hands hovering near their holsters. "May, my child!" Grigg shouted. He held the Bible aloft. "I have come for you. I have come to pluck the brand from the burning, as I did once before." Levi raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel. The preacher was just in range. He could end this. 1 shot. "Don't," May whispered, her hand gripping his arm. "Don't. Not yet." "He's open. May, I can take him." "No, this is mine." Ezra Grigg smiled, a thin, self-righteous expression. He knew she was in there. He knew she was listening. "Child, you have fallen into the hands of a wicked man, a man of blood. He has corrupted what I made clean. But I am here to offer salvation. I have not come for vengeance, but for reclamation." He walked closer, his confidence absolute. He stopped near the horse trough, a mere 30 yards from the door. "You have been deceived. May, you have been led astray by the whispers of the serpent, but my forgiveness is as vast as the sky. Repent, come out from that den of iniquity. Cast aside your sin, and I will restore you. I will cleanse you in the blood of the Lamb. I promise you safety. I promise you forgiveness." Inside the cabin, May's trembling stopped. The blood drained from her face, leaving it a pale, cold mask. The preacher's words, the ones that had once held her captive, now sounded hollow, manipulative, and obscene. He was not offering forgiveness. He was offering a cage. Levi watched her. He saw the change, the terror freezing into something else, something hard. "May, stay inside," he ordered. "This is a trick. He wants you in the open." May picked up the rifle she had just loaded. She checked the chamber. She turned and looked at Levi, her eyes dark and empty. "He needs to see me. It's a mistake. It's my choice," she said. Before he could stop her, she unbarred the door and stepped out. The sunlight was blinding. She stood on the small porch, the Winchester held loosely in one hand at her side. She did not raise it. Ezra Grigg's sermon stopped mid-word. He stared. He saw the boy's clothes, the trousers, the short, hacked-off hair. His face, which had been a mask of pastoral concern, twisted. Disgust warred with a dark, possessive anger. "So," he hissed, his voice losing its boom, becoming a venomous whisper. "The corruption is complete. You have shed your womanhood. You have embraced the sin of the flesh." He began to walk toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. "You have broken my heart. May, you were my greatest reclamation and my deepest failure." "I am not May," she said, her voice clear in the silence. It did not tremble. He stopped, just feet from her. He was taller than she was, a wall of black cloth and righteous fury. He looked at her, at the rifle, at her cold eyes. He needed to break her. He needed to see her fear. "You are whatever I say you are," he spat. "You are filth. You are a harlot who fled the house of the Lord." "You are not the Lord," she said. The slap was a crack of thunder in the still air. His hand moved so fast she did not see it. It was a full, open-handed blow that snapped her head to the side, splitting her lip. She stumbled, catching herself on the porch rail. Inside the cabin, Levi lunged. His hand went to his pistol, his thumb pulling back the hammer. He was halfway to drawing, a curse rising in his throat. He would kill him. He would kill him right now. But he stopped. May did not cry out. She did not fall. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head back. She raised a hand, not to her bleeding mouth, but to wipe a single tear of pure, cold fury from her eye. She looked at Ezra Grigg, her gaze so empty it was terrifying. "I already repented," she said, her voice a dead, cold whisper. "Now it's your turn." It was the trigger. Ezra's face contorted in rage. He had lost her. He saw it. He screamed. "She is possessed! A witch! Cleanse her! My sons! Send her soul to hell!" He dove to the side as the two gunmen drew. But Levi was faster. He had been waiting for this. His rifle cracked from the window, the sound echoing across the yard. The gunman on the right spun, clutching his chest, a look of profound surprise on his face. He was dead before he hit the ground. The second gunman, however, was focused on May. He ignored the cabin and raised his own rifle, aiming at the woman on the porch. May saw him. The world slowed. The man, the black hole of the barrel. She remembered her training, run, cover, but she was frozen. "May, down!" Levi roared. He burst from the cabin door, leaving his cover, his only thought to get to her. He shoved her, hard, off the porch and into the dust, just as the gunman fired. The bullet, meant for her heart, tore through Levi's left arm, just above the elbow. The impact spun him around. A hot, searing pain shot from his shoulder to his fingers. He stumbled, his arm useless, but he did not fall. He raised his rifle with his one good hand, bracing it against his hip, and fired. The shot was wild, but it made the gunman duck. May landed hard. The wind knocked out of her. She looked up and saw Levi, his face pale, blood pouring from his arm, standing between her and the gunman. The gunman rose from behind the horse trough, leveling his pistol for a final shot. May screamed, a sound of pure rage. She raised her own rifle from the dust. She did not aim. She pointed. She did not think. She breathed. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the explosion deafening. The gunman jerked. He looked down at his stomach, at the dark, spreading stain. He looked at her, his expression not of anger, but of simple confusion. He sat down, hard. Then he toppled over into the mud by the trough. Silence. The yard was still. The only sound was the drip of blood from Levi's arm, spotting the dust. May looked at the man she had shot. He was not moving. She looked at Levi. He was swaying, his rifle clattering to the ground. And then she saw Ezra Grigg, the preacher, his face a mask of terror, was scrambling onto his horse. He had no weapon. He was a coward. He kicked the horse hard and galloped away, back over the ridge, disappearing as fast as he had come. May didn't even think to shoot at him. She scrambled to her feet and ran to Levi. "You're hit," she whispered, grabbing his good arm. "He's gone," Levi grunted, his gaze on the ridge. He leaned on her, his weight heavy. "Is the other one?" "He's dead," May said, her voice flat. Good," Levi breathed. He looked at the two bodies in his yard. We can't leave them." He was slumping, the shock and blood loss hitting him. "We have to bury them." It was a grim, terrible task. It took them hours, May, her hands shaking again, this time with exhaustion and the aftermath of adrenaline, had to do most of the work. Levi, his face gray with pain, sat with his back against the cabin, his pistol in his lap, directing her. "Drag them," he ordered. "Behind the barn. The ground is softer there." She had to touch him. The man she had killed. She grabbed his boots and pulled. He was heavy. The air was filled with the metallic, coppery smell of blood. She did not cry. She did not speak. She just pulled. She dug. The ground was hard, rocky. Levi tried to help with his one good arm, but he was too weak. She dug 2 shallow graves. They rolled the bodies in, without ceremony, without words. May shoveled the dirt back. It felt final. By the time they were done, the sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of red and purple. Inside the cabin, the light was dim. The smell of gunpowder and blood was thick. May tore a sheet into strips. She fetched the whiskey bottle and a clean rag. "This will hurt," she whispered. "Get on with it," he gritted. She poured the whiskey over the wound. Levi's entire body went rigid. A strangled groan escaped his teeth. But he did not cry out. The bullet had gone clean through, shattering the bone. She washed the blood from his arm, her hands gentle. Her hands, which had dug the graves, which had pulled the trigger, which were covered in his blood and the dirt. And as she worked, the tears finally came. They were not for the dead men. They were not even for Levi. They were for the sheer, terrible cost of the day. They dripped from her chin onto his arm, mixing with the blood and the whiskey. She bound the arm tightly, making a sling from a leather strap. He was pale, his skin clammy. She helped him to the bed, and he collapsed onto it, exhausted. She sat on the floor, her back against the bed, and watched the darkness fill the room. She did not light a lamp. That night, they lay in the dark, side by side. The cabin felt too large, too empty, the silence too loud. Levi was breathing shallowly, the pain keeping him on the edge of sleep. May was staring at the ceiling, her body aching, her mind numb. "The man," she whispered into the darkness. "The one I shot. I keep waiting to feel something." Levi turned his head, his face a pale shape in the gloom. "I keep trying to feel sorry for him," she continued, her voice trembling, but not with tears. "Or guilty, like I felt after the barn. Shame." She took a shaky breath. "But I don't. I feel nothing. I watched him fall, and I felt quiet, like the wind stopped." She turned to face him, her voice breaking. "What does that mean? Am I broken? Levi, did Ezra finally break me, or did you?" He was quiet for a long time. She could feel the heat of his body, the faint tremor of his pain. He reached out his good hand, his fingers finding her face in the dark. He touched her cheek, rough, calloused, and gentle. "You're not broken," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You survived." "But I felt nothing." "That's how you survive," he said. "Feeling, that comes later. Or it doesn't. When it's you or them, there's no room for feeling. There's just the trigger. You did what you had to do." She let out a breath she had been holding since she pulled that trigger. The absolution he offered was stark and terrible, and exactly what she needed. She leaned into his hand, her tears starting again. Silent and hot. "He'll come back." "I know." She moved closer, desperate for his warmth, for the proof that they were both still alive. He tasted the salt of her tears on his lips. It was a kiss of shared trauma, a desperate, raw clinging. It was not about passion, or even comfort. It was 2 survivors, 2 killers, acknowledging the blood they now shared, and finding a dark, desperate solace in the ruins. The shootout was over, but the echo of it remained. A sickness in the air. Word would spread. The drunk, Jeb, would tell his story. The storekeep, Peters, would tell his, and Ezra Grigg, alive and fled. would rally more men. He would not call them bounty hunters. He would call them a righteous posse. Levi knew this. He lay on the bed, his face pale, his arm a throbbing, useless weight. May sat beside him, the rag she had used to clean the wound still in her hand. The blood on it was already drying. "He'll be back," she said. It was not a question. "He is," Levi answered, his voice tight with pain. "He won't stop, not now. A witch and a killer. That's a story men will ride for. We can't stay. The homestead is compromised. It's a grave." He pushed himself up with his good arm, his teeth gritted. "We leave at sunrise. We pack only what the horses can carry. Ammunition, water, food. The rest we burn." The decision hung in the small cabin, heavy as the smell of gunpowder. This place, this shelter Levi had built against the world, was now a trap. They prepared in the pre-dawn dark, moving like ghosts in the dim light of a single lantern. May's hands were steady now. The numbness of her first kill had settled into a cold, hard resolve. She gathered the cartridges she had loaded, the jerky she had dried. She filled 4 canteens. Levi worked with his one good arm, his movements slow and agonizing. He saddled his horse, then hers, his breath hissing through his teeth. Every pull on a cinch sent a fresh wave of fire up his damaged arm. He packed the medical supplies, what little they had, and the last of the coffee. He went to the small iron box he kept buried under a floorboard. He pulled it out and took a stack of double eagles, stuffing them into his trouser pockets. "We burn the rest," he said. He meant the cot, the table, the chairs, his anvil, his forge, 10 years of his penance. May piled the furniture in the center of the room. She added the blankets, the empty flour sacks, the thin curtains. Levi kicked open the door to his forge. He used his good hand to tip the anvil over into the dirt. He looked at his hammers, the tools that had been his only voice for a decade. He left them where they lay. He took the lantern and smashed it on the pile of furniture. Kerosene splashed. He struck a match and tossed it. The flames caught with a whoosh, bright orange in the graying dark. They stood outside and watched the cabin burn. It was a funeral pyre. It was the only way to ensure Ezra Grigg found nothing but ash. As the flames licked the roof, Levi turned to the horses, his face illuminated by the destruction of his life. May, however, did not move. She looked at the fire, and then she turned her gaze to the yard, to the dark, disturbed earth behind the barn, to the muddy patch by the trough. While Levi checked the saddlebags, his back to her, she walked away. She walked alone onto the battlefield of the previous day. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, casting a sick, gray light. The air was cold. She went first to the place where Ezra had fallen, where he had scrambled to his horse. In the mud, half-trodden, lay his black coat. He had fled without it. She picked it up. It was heavy, made of good wool. It smelled faintly of old sweat and cheap, sweet pomade. It smelled of his false piety. She held it for a moment, the symbol of his cowardice. Then she went to the trough, to the spot where the second gunman had fallen, the man she had killed. The ground was dark, soaked with his blood. She knelt, her eyes scanning the mud. She saw something glint. Reaching down, her fingers closing around it, she pulled a man's ring from the mud. It was simple, a wide band of cheap, tarnished silver, with no stone. It was a wedding band. She stared at it. This was not a burlap sack. This was a man who had a wife, perhaps a man who had died for $50, or perhaps for a belief in a preacher's poison. She closed her fist around the cold metal. She felt the sharp edge of it dig into her palm. She did not feel guilt. She did not feel pride. She felt the weight of it, the truth. She stood, shoving the heavy black coat into her saddlebag and slipping the ring into the deep pocket of her trousers. It was a reminder. This was the cost of not running. When she returned to the horses, Levi was waiting. He had seen her. He looked at her face, at the grim set of her jaw. and he knew she was no longer the same person he had found near starvation. He said nothing. He nodded and swung himself painfully into his saddle. They rode south, away from the rising sun and the column of black smoke that had been their home. They rode for 2 days, pushing the horses, pushing themselves. Levi was a silent figure of agony beside her. He rode slumped, his bad arm strapped tight to his chest, but his eyes never stopped scanning their back trail. May, now, was the one who watched the front. Her rifle was in her lap, not in its scabbard. On the 3rd day, the sky turned against them. A wall of brown, churning dust rose up from the north. It moved faster than any horse, a roiling, suffocating mass that blotted out the sun. A dust storm, one of the great northers that could strip paint from a wagon and skin from a man. "We have to find cover," Levi yelled over the rising shriek of the wind. The air became thick, impossible to breathe. Dust filled their eyes, their mouths, their lungs. The world vanished into a screaming, brown hell. "There," May pointed. "A shadow." It was a cleft in a low-rising mesa, a dark mouth in the rock. They stumbled toward it, half blind, leading the panicked horses. It was a cave, not deep, but deep enough. They pushed the horses into the back, where they huddled, whickering in terror. Levi and May collapsed near the mouth, pulling their neckerchiefs over their faces as the storm raged outside. A solid wall of noise and grit. They were trapped. They sat there for hours as the day turned to night, though the darkness inside the cave was unchanging. The wind howled, a symphony of despair. May finally dared to build a tiny fire, using dry brush she found in the back of the cave. It was nearly smokeless, a small circle of light in the vast, oppressive dark. In the flickering light, she saw Levi. He was shivering, but not from cold. His face was ashen, his skin clammy. The front of his shirt was dark with fresh blood. His wound had reopened. "You're bleeding," she said, her voice quiet. He looked down, as if surprised. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She moved to him, opening the medical pouch. She pulled his shirt away. The makeshift bandage was soaked. The flesh around the wound was swollen, inflamed, and hot to the touch. She uncorked the whiskey bottle. "This is all we have." She cleaned it again. He did not flinch, but a low, ragged groan was torn from his chest. His good hand, the right one, was clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. When she was done, rewrapping it with the last of the clean cloth, he did not pull away. He stayed hunched over, his head in his good hand, his shoulders shaking. She stared at him. Levi Cross, the quiet, unshakable man, he was breaking. It's the same," he whispered, his voice broken, unrecognizable. "The same as Colorado, the mud, the blood." "Levi." I killed those men," he choked out, the words ripped from him. "Back at the homestead, I shot that first one, and it felt easy. It felt like coming home." He looked up at her, his eyes hollowed by the firelight, filled with a terrible self-loathing. "I ran from it for 10 years. I beat iron. I kept my hands busy so they wouldn't. But when Griggs slapped you, all I wanted was to kill him. All I wanted was to kill all of them." He held up his good hand. It was scarred from the forge, but it was trembling. This is supposed to be a hand for making things, for shoeing a horse, for building a wall. But it's not. It's a weapon. I'm just a weapon. That's all I've ever been." The pain of the wound was nothing compared to the pain in his voice. This was his deepest truth, the one he had hidden from her, from himself. "I took you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I took you, and I used your fear to justify my own. I didn't teach you how to shoot to save you. May, I taught you so I would have an excuse to be this thing again." He leaned his head back against the gritty cave wall, closing his eyes. "I'm not a man. I'm just the thing that pulls the trigger. And I've I've turned you into one, too." He was done. The confession left him empty, a husk. May watched him, her heart aching. The man who had been her rock was shattered, and in his breaking, she found her own strength. She was no longer the terrified creature he had found. She was the woman who had stood on the porch, the woman who had buried her kill. She moved closer, sitting on her heels in front of him. She reached out and took his trembling, good hand in both of hers. Her hands were rough, calloused, and steady. "You're wrong," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He opened his eyes. "The first time I saw you," she said, "in your cabin. You were cleaning your rifle. I was terrified, not of the rifle, of you. I had just come from men who use their strength to hurt, and you were the strongest thing I had ever seen. But you were quiet." She held his hand tighter. "I watched you for days. You never spoke when a nod would do. You never used a hard word. You moved like you were ashamed of the space you took up. I didn't see a weapon. I saw a man who was hiding, same as me." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "When I asked you to teach me, you said no. You said it wasn't something anyone should want. A weapon doesn't say that. Levi, a weapon doesn't care." "May I—" "You taught me to breathe," she insisted, her voice raw. "You taught me how to stand. You did not turn me into you. You turned me into me. You gave me the one thing Ezra Grigg took, a choice." She leaned in, her forehead almost touching his. "And when he slapped me, you didn't see an excuse. You saw him hurt me, and you did what you had to do, just like I did. We're not weapons. We're survivors. You said it yourself." He stared at her, the self-loathing in his eyes warring with a desperate, fragile hope. She was not afraid of his darkness. She had walked into it and held up a light. "I trusted you," she whispered. "From the very beginning. I thought you looked like someone worth trusting, even if you didn't trust yourself." The wind howled outside, a lonely, desperate sound. But inside the cave, the silence was profound. He reached up, his good hand, the one she held, and touched her face. He traced the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing her chapped lips. He looked at her, not as a broken thing to be saved, but as the woman who had just saved him. He pulled her to him. The kiss was not desperate, like the one in the dark of the cabin. It was not hungry, like the one in the barn. It was intense and slow, and filled with all the things they had been afraid to say. It was a kiss of gratitude, of acceptance. They made love there, on the hard, gritty floor of the cave, with the storm screaming outside. It was slow. It was deliberate. He was careful of his arm, and she was careful of his broken spirit. And this time, May kept her eyes open. She watched his face in the firelight. She watched the pain and the guilt slowly recede, replaced by a raw, unguarded need. She saw him, all of him, the killer and the farrier, the broken man and the protector. And she was not afraid. She met his gaze, and in that silent, shared look, they were bound, not by blood or fear, but by a choice. The storm blew itself out by the next morning. They emerged into a world scoured clean, the air sharp and cold. They rode south for another 2 days, avoiding towns, until Levi's fever became too high to ignore. They found a small, dusty town near the border, Sanacaccio. It was sundown. "We need supplies," Levi murmured, swaying. "Whiskey, and laudanum, and food." "I'll go," May said. No, together. They walked into the only general store, which was also the saloon. May was still the boy in her loose clothes. Levi was the one-armed man, his face pale with fever. They were a grim pair. The saloon was half full of miners and drifters. May went to the bar. "Bottle of your cheapest whiskey, and a small bottle of laudanum." The bartender squinted at the boy but pushed the bottles forward. As May paid, a conversation from a nearby table drifted over. Said he rode in 2 days ago. Holed up at the old Goliath mine. A man was saying. That preacher, Grigg. May froze. Got 5 men with him, another man added. Hired him in Silver City. Says he's hunting a witch and her consort, a one-armed gunslinger named Cross. A witch? Aye, that's what he's telling folks. Says they murdered his men in cold blood. Says he's gonna wait 'em out. Knows they'll come back this way. For the border. Says he plans to burn them out. Burn the sin right out of the territory. May picked up the bottles, her hand steady. She walked back to Levi, who was leaning heavily against the doorframe, watching her. She relayed the words in a low, flat whisper. Levi absorbed the news. His face hardened. He pushed himself off the doorframe and guided her outside, into the dying light. He looked down the dark, empty street, south, toward Mexico, toward freedom. We have the horses, he said, his voice rough with fever. We have money. We can be across the border in 6 hours. Gone. He'll never find us. He was offering her the escape she had begged for weeks ago. He was offering her safety. He wanted to walk away. He was a man with one arm, a fever, and a past he couldn't outrun. He just wanted her to be safe. May stood beside him. She looked south at the deepening shadows. Then she looked north, toward the mining camp. She thought of the ring in her pocket. She thought of Ezra's coat. She thought of him waiting, so sure of his righteousness, so certain of her sin. No, she said. Levi turned, confused. May, he has 5 men. I'm not what I was. I am, she said. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and hard in the twilight. You taught me to shoot so I wouldn't run. Levi? He stared at her, seeing the iron he had forged. This doesn't end if we run, she said, her voice quiet but absolute. He will hunt us. He will never stop. He will send men, and more men. We will spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. I'm tired of running. She was the one who convinced him. She was the one who made the choice. It ends with Ezra, she said, or it never ends. Levi looked at her for a long time, the man who had run from his past, the man who had hidden in silence. He saw his own strength reflected back at him, in her. He had taught her to survive, and now she was teaching him how to fight. He nodded, a single, slow movement. All right, it ends with Ezra. The Goliath mine was a fresh scar on a high, barren mesa, about 15 miles north of San Ignacio. It was a place of raw, shattered rock and little else. They scouted it on foot, leaving the horses miles back in a dry arroyo. Levi was in a bad way. The fever from his arm had settled deep, and he moved with a painful stiffness, his face slick with a sweat that had nothing to do with the heat. His good arm, his right, was strong, but his left was a useless, burning weight strapped to his chest. He was compromised, and he knew it. They lay on their bellies on a ridge opposite the mining camp, 1,000 yards across a chasm of wind. They watched for a full day. The camp was small, a cluster of tents, a main, wooden structure for the foreman's office, and a scattering of ore carts. May counted. 1 man on the ridge above the mine entrance, a rifleman, 2 playing cards near the main tent, 1 sleeping by the cold forge. That was 4. Where's the 5th? She whispered, the field glass steady in her hands. And where's Ezra? Levi murmured, his voice rough. He wiped his brow, his hands shaking slightly. They watched. The men were lazy. They were not trackers, they were hired guns, bored and waiting for a payday. In the late afternoon, Ezra Grigg emerged from the foreman's office. He was clean, his black coat brushed, his Bible in his hand. He paced in the small patch of shade, his lips moving as if rehearsing a sermon. The 5th man, a big, heavy man, brought him a plate of food. Ezra ate, then went back inside. He's staying in the office, Levi observed. Smart, Solid wood. Only one door. They're not worried, May said, lowering the glass. Her voice was flat, cold. They're just waiting. They expect us to run for the border. They think we'll be tired and desperate. We are tired and desperate, Levi grunted. But we're not running, she said. They slipped back to their horses as dusk fell, the cold of the high desert settling in. Levi was shivering badly. May built a small, smokeless fire in the arroyo, hidden by the rocks, and forced him to drink hot water and the last of their coffee. I can't make that shot. May, he said, his teeth chattering. Not from 1,000 yards, not with his fever, not with one arm. I know, she said. She was cleaning her rifle, her movements methodical. If I get closer, 400 yards, maybe, but they'll see me. The man on the ridge. You're not going to be on the ridge, she said. He stopped, looking at her in the dim firelight. This is my plan, she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. She looked up, and her eyes were the ones that had stared down Ezra on the porch. You said his arrogance is his weakness. He's arrogant about me. He thinks I'm a lost sheep. He thinks I'm weak and sinful, and that I secretly want to be saved by him. May. He wants a show, she continued, ignoring his interruption. He wants to see me crawl. He'll want to cleanse me in front of his new men, to prove how righteous he is. That's his victory. What's the plan? Levi asked, his voice grim. You'll go in, not as a sniper, as a prisoner, she said. He stared at her. What? No, not you, me, she corrected herself, her focus absolute. I'm the prisoner. I'll ride in at dawn, alone. I'll look broken. I'll have my hands up. I'll tell them I'm running from you, that you're a devil, that I want to repent. He'll kill you on sight. No, he won't, May said. He won't be able to resist. He needs to gloat. He needs to preach. He will bring me into the center of the camp. He will make a speech. All his men will gather around to watch the show. They'll be watching me and him. And while they're watching you? Levi asked, seeing the terrible, beautiful logic of it. They won't be watching the rocks, she said. The camp is in a hollow. The east side, by the forge, is all broken rock and slag heaps. You'll slip in during the dark. You'll be close, 60, 70 yards. You'll have cover. When he has all of them gathered, when he's busy saving my soul, you'll do what you do. It's suicide, he whispered. He'll have men on you before. You won't shoot Ezra first, she said. He's mine. You take the men. You're fast. Levi, even with one arm, you take the riflemen on the ridge first, just as the sun hits. Then you take the others. You shoot, and I move. I'll have a pistol hidden. In the confusion, I get to Ezra. It was a terrible plan. It relied on arrogance, on timing, on her ability to lie, and on his ability to kill 4 men before they killed him. He'll search you, Levi argued, his voice ragged. He'll have his men search me, she said, and they'll be thorough. I'll expect it. But he won't let them be too thorough. Not at first. He'll want me unsoiled for his sermon. I'll hide the pistol. In the back, small of my back. May, no! He grabbed her hand, his good hand, his grip hot with fever. We run! We go south! This is too much! She covered his hand with her own. You taught me to shoot so I wouldn't run. Remember? It ends with him, or it never ends. This is the only way he dies. And we live. He looked at her, at the woman who had replaced the girl he found. He saw the iron. He saw the survivor. He saw the killer he had made, and the woman who had saved him in the cave. He nodded, a single, pained motion. At dawn. The hours before sunrise were the coldest. Levi, his fever spiking, was a ghost moving through the rocks. He left his horse, taking only his rifle, his pistol, and his knife. May watched him disappear into the shadows. A one-armed, limping man, moving toward a fight against 5. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. She waited until the first hint of gray light touched the eastern sky. She mounted her horse. She rode out of the arroyo and up the main track to the Goliath mine. The riflemen on the ridge saw her first. "Rider! Rider coming in!" She kept the horse at a walk, her hands held high, palms out. She had tied a white rag to her saddle, a flimsy flag of surrender. She wore the clothes she had been found in, the tattered dress she had kept, her short hair a mess. She looked like a refugee. By the time she reached the camp, the 5 men were out, rifles in hand, forming a loose, wary circle. "That's her," one of them said. "That's the witch!" "Where's Cross?" the big man shouted. He's gone," May cried, letting her voice break. She slumped in the saddle, a picture of defeat. He tried to kill me. He's a monster. He's the devil. Please, I want Preacher Grigg. Is he here? He saved me once. Please, save me again." The men looked confused, their rifles lowering slightly. This was not the gunslinging witch they had been warned about. The door to the foreman's office opened. Ezra Grigg stepped out. He was holding his Bible. He looked at May, at her torn dress, her trembling hands, her tear-streaked face. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who has just seen God confirm his every action. "I knew it," he breathed, his voice rich with satisfaction. "The lamb has returned to the fold, the brand, plucked again from the burning. Stand down, my sons. The Lord has delivered her." He walked toward her, his arrogance a tangible thing. "Get down from the horse, child." May slid from the saddle, stumbling, her legs too weak to hold her. She fell to her knees in the dust, 10 feet from him. "Oh, preacher," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. He is a demon. He made me. He made me do terrible things." "Of course he did," Ezra said, his voice a soothing, venomous balm. He stepped closer. The other men gathered, forming a half circle, their rifles now slung over their shoulders, ready to watch the show. They were all looking at him, at her. "And now you have returned." Ezra boomed, raising his Bible. "You have come, a prodigal, to beg forgiveness. And the Lord is mighty in his mercy." "Search her," the big man said, spitting. "She might be armed." Ezra's smile faltered, annoyed by the interruption. "Thomas, of course, a wise precaution." Thomas, the big man, stepped forward, grabbing May's arm and hauling her to her feet. "Turn around." May did, her body shaking. His hands were rough. They ran down her arms, her sides. He pushed her, hard, against an ore cart. He patted her down. His hands moved over her back, paused, and then stopped, just as they brushed the small pistol tucked into the waistband of her trousers, hidden by the loose shirt. At that exact moment, the sun crested the ridge. The first ray of light struck something on the slag heap, a glint of metal. The riflemen on the ridge above the mine, the 6th man they hadn't seen, shouted, "A man in the rocks, it's—" The shot was a deafening crack, a hammer blow. The rifleman on the ridge did not finish his sentence. He simply crumpled, his rifle clattering down the rocks. Ezra Grigg's head snapped up. Thomas, his hand still on May's back, on the gun, spun around. A second shot. The man nearest Thomas screamed and grabbed his knee, falling. May moved. She spun, her elbow connecting with Thomas's throat. As he gagged, she ripped the pistol from her waistband, turned, and fired. The bullet took him in the chest, and he fell backward, his eyes wide with surprise. "Treachery!" Ezra shrieked, his face white with rage and terror. "She's killer!" A third shot from the rocks. The man who had been shot in the knee tried to raise his rifle. and Levi's bullet took him in the head. The remaining 2 men scattered, diving for cover, firing blindly at the slag heap. Bullets ricocheted, whining through the air. May was on the ground, scrambling. She saw Ezra. He was not reaching for a gun. He was running. He was running for the foreman's office, for the solid door, to hide. "No!" May screamed. She raised her pistol, but before she could fire, one of the men, the one who had dived behind the forge, saw her. He raised his rifle, his aim true. "May!" Levi's voice, a roar of primal fear. She saw the flash, felt the impact. It was a sledgehammer. A white-hot, agonizing pain exploded in her left leg. She was thrown to the ground, her pistol skittering away in the dust. She cried out, a sharp, broken sound. On the ridge, Levi saw her go down. He lost his mind. He stood up. He walked out from behind the rock, his face a mask of inhuman rage, his bad arms swinging uselessly. He was a one-armed angel of death. "You!" he roared, firing his rifle from the hip. The man who had shot May looked up, his jaw dropping at the sight of this apparition. Levi's bullet took him in the throat. He fell, gargling. The last man, the one who had been playing cards, broke. He threw his gun down and ran. Levi didn't even look at him. He was walking toward May. But the fight wasn't over. The big man, Thomas, the one May had shot in the chest, was not dead. He was a bull. He rose to one knee, his face a mask of blood, and raised his own pistol. He was aiming at Levi's back. Levi didn't see him. He was walking to May. Thomas fired. The bullet missed. Levi spun, his rifle empty. He drew his pistol with his good right hand, but he was too far. Thomas grinned, a bloody rictus, and leveled his pistol for a second shot. Levi did the only thing he could. He charged. He crossed the 20 yards in a heartbeat, a low growl in his chest. He crashed into the bigger man, his shoulder hitting Thomas's chest. The pistol fired, the shot going wild. They fell together, a tangle of limbs. Levi, his fever, his bad arm, his exhaustion, was no match for the healthy, dying, raging man. Thomas was on top, his massive hands closing around Levi's throat. Levi's pistol was pinned beneath them. He couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in his vision. He was going to die here. He let go of the pistol. He reached with his good hand, his fingers finding the man's face, his thumb finding his eye. He pushed. Thomas screamed, a high, wet sound, and his grip loosened. Levi bucked. Throwing the man off, he scrambled, his hand finding the knife at his belt. Thomas came at him again, a roaring, blinded animal. Levi didn't have time to stand. He drove the knife up, under the man's ribs, with all the force of his body. He felt the hilt hit bone. Thomas stopped. He looked down, at the knife buried in his belly. He looked at Levi. He sighed, a bloody bubble bursting on his lips, and fell. Silence. The camp was still. The sun was fully up. The only sound was the wind, and the sound of someone weeping. Levi pushed himself to his feet. He was covered in Thomas's blood. He was dizzy, his arm on fire. He turned. May? She was on the ground, trying to crawl. Her leg was a ruin. Blood was pumping from a wound in her thigh, dark and fast. Ezra. She was crawling toward her pistol. She was crawling toward Ezra Grigg, who had stopped halfway to his door and was now running again, scrambling toward a horse tethered by the office. He was going to escape. Again. May, Levi croaked, stumbling toward her. He's running, she panted, her face bone white. She reached the pistol, her fingers closing around the grip. She was half conscious, her vision blurring. She saw him, a black coat, a running coward. You taught me to breathe, she whispered. She raised the pistol with both hands, her arms shaking. She did not aim. She pointed. She saw him. She saw the man who had hurt her, the man who had branded her, the man who had taken her life. She fired. The shot was small in the vast, open air. Ezra Griggs stopped. He stood very still. He turned, his face a mask of utter disbelief. He looked at May. He looked down at the small, dark hole in the center of his chest. He opened his mouth, perhaps to quote scripture, perhaps to curse her. No sound came out. He fell, face first, into the dust. And he, too, was still. The silence that fell was absolute. May let the pistol fall from her numb fingers. She collapsed onto her back, her gaze fixed on the bright, empty blue of the sky. It was over. She heard him before she saw him. The scrape of boots, the ragged breathing. Levi fell to his knees beside her. He was covered in blood, his face a ruin of fever, exhaustion, and a terror so profound it eclipsed everything else. You're shot," he whispered, his good hand hovering over her leg, afraid to touch her. "So are you," she breathed, a small, pained smile touching her lips. "May," he said, his voice breaking. He grabbed her hand. You're... "I'm here," she whispered. He fumbled with his neckerchief, his one good hand clumsy and shaking. He pressed it to her leg, hard, trying to staunch the bleeding. She cried out, a sharp intake of breath. "I have to," he said, his own tears tracing paths through the grime and blood on his face. "I have to?" He looked at her pale face, at her eyes, which were closing. "Stay with me, May, stay with me. Don't you leave me." He looked around, at the bodies, at the dead camp. He looked at her. Gently, his movements agonizing. He slipped his good arm under her back, his wounded arm under her shattered leg. He ignored the fire that shot through his own body. He lifted her. She cried out in pain, and he gritted his teeth, his whole body shaking with the effort. He lifted her into his arms, holding her against his chest. She opened her eyes, her head lolling against his shoulder. "You're alive," she murmured. He was crying. Levi Cross, was openly weeping, his tears dripping onto her face. "You saved us," he choked out, the words torn from his soul. "You said you would. You saved us." He began to walk, carrying her, leaving the dead behind. He walked past the body of Ezra Griggs, and he did not spare it a glance. He walked toward the horses, toward the south, toward Mexico, toward life. Weeks later, they were in a different world. They had crossed the border, two broken, bleeding fugitives, and had not stopped until the mountains of New Mexico were a distant, bitter memory. They found a canyon near the border, a place of red rock and a small, clear stream, hidden from the world. There, they found the remains of a small, burned-out adobe cabin. They settled. It was slow. Levi's arm healed, but the bone had been shattered. It was stiff, his elbow forever locked at a slight angle. He would never shoe a horse with that arm again. He learned to shoot left-handed. May's leg was worse. The bullet had taken a piece of the bone. She would always walk with a limp. They rebuilt the cabin, adobe brick by adobe brick. Levi worked with his one good arm, and May, sitting in the dirt, mixed the mud and straw. They worked in silence, a man and a woman, scarred and battered, building something new from the ruins of something old. It was a quiet life. They had few words. They had seen the worst of each other, and the worst of the world. There was little left to say. One night, months later, the cabin was finished. A fire was crackling in the small hearth they had built. The air was cold, the desert wind singing a low, lonely song outside. Levi sat cleaning his new pistol, the left-handed one. May was rubbing her leg, the cold making the old wound ache. She looked at him, at the set of his jaw in the firelight, at the new, deep lines around his eyes. She looked at his stiff, useless arm. "Levi," she said, her voice soft. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Teach me again," she said. He frowned, confused. "Teach you what?" "How to shoot," she said. I'm clumsy. With this leg, I need to learn again. How to stand, how to be steady." He was quiet for a long time. He set the pistol down. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was not the hard, cold smile of the killer. It was something new. He moved across the small room, his own steps uneven, favoring his good side. He sat on the floor in front of her. He laughed, a low, rough sound, rusty from disuse. He leaned in close, his forehead almost touching hers. "All right," he whispered, his voice warm, "but only if you close your eyes first." She closed her eyes. He didn't hand her a rifle. He kissed her. It was slow. It was sure. It was a kiss that held no memory of fear, or blood, or survival. It was not the desperate kiss of a battlefield, or the hungry kiss of a barn, or the grieving kiss of a dark cabin. For the first time, it felt like home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West. And finally, what did you think? Share your thoughts in English. I read every one.